Hello, CIS 157 students. I just wanted to record a quick video to walk you through some of the Module 2 assignment problem sets. And so Module 2, we're dealing with Python data types, variables, operators, and basic I/O or input-output operations. And I want to walk you through maybe a couple of the stumbling blocks you might run into on some of these problems here. So as you can see, I have Visual Studio Code open as my text editor. I've already created a folder for week 2 assignments here. And the first thing I'm going to do is create a new Python file or a program for the first problem set, which is our integer and float operations. So in VS Code, I can go up to my file explorer here and click this little new file icon, and then I can name my file. This one I'll name operations.py. Okay, and we got my new file here. And then what I'm going to do, just to make it, you guys don't have to do this, but just to make it easier to follow along, is I'm going to paste in the instructions. And in Python, we can kind of comment all of this out so the code won't run by putting 3 quotation marks at the beginning and at the end of kind of all of the text. And this is one way to do a multi-line comment in Python. And so everything in between these top 3 quotation marks and these bottom 3 won't be run as code. These are just a long code comment for you to look at as a programmer. Okay, so I just got those in there again so it's easier for us to follow along. Make this a little smaller here so it fits better on one screen. Okay, and then right below this, on line 17 for me, is where we can start writing the program, the code that we'll actually execute. So reading through what this first problem set is having us do, it's asking us to do a couple of things to start off. The first one is it would like us to declare 2 different variables, one of them being an integer and another one being a floating point or a decimal number. And an integer is really just a positive or negative whole number that doesn't have a decimal in it. And then floating point, like I said, positive or negative decimal number. So in Python, the way that we can declare a variable is simply by typing out what we want our variable to be named. Now there's a couple of caveats here. There's a couple of restrictions when naming variables in Python. The first restriction is that the variable cannot start with a number. So I can't type in the number 1 even if I put text out of it and set that equal to something. That does not work in Python. Variables also can't start with special characters. So no numbers, you can't start it with a quote. So really they just have to start with a letter, lowercase or uppercase. The last restriction that you should all be aware of is that there are certain keywords in Python that are reserved and already used in the Python programming language, and so we can't use those as variable names either. And so one of those keywords refers to an integer, and it's int for int. So I can't name my variable int. If I try to do that, equals 5, and I try to run this code, I'm going to get an error when running it, because this is a reserved word. We cannot use it for our own variables. And in general, if you're using a word that's reserved that you can't use for variables, it will be colored kind of out of the box like this. Float is another one that is reserved and can't be used. So is str for string. And so instead of naming the integer int, I can name it myInt with just an underscore there. And then we can set this to equal whatever value we want by doing the equal sign. And then we want to put in an integer. So I'll do 42 for my integer there. Okay, so that's how we can declare an integer and assign it to this variable, myInt, assign the value 42 to this variable in Python. On the next line, I want to make a floating point number. And so using the same type of syntax, I'm just going to call this my_float. And I'll set that equal to any decimal number. So I'll do 13.37 for my floating value, okay? And then the next thing the program asks us to do is to just print the variables with the description. So here's where we can use the print statements that we have gone over or that you should have read about in your reading. And so I'll start with print, open up my braces here, and then we can just describe what the variable is. So I can type in my integer colon and then comma, and then I want to give it the name of the variable that I just named. So mine's called myInt And so I can just put my int right there. Okay, and when we run this program, it's going to print my integer with a colon and then a space, and then it's going to print the value inside of my int. So it's not going to print my int, it's going to print what is assigned to my int. So to demonstrate that, I'll click the Run Python button, and that'll open my terminal. And there's a lot of output, but right here, here's the main output of my program. So my integer, 42. Okay? We can do the same thing with our floating point number. So just print my floating point number, and then we'll just give it the variable my float there. Okay, so same exact way. And now if we run this again and I scroll up, we'll do it one more time. We see that we have both the integer and the floating point number printed out to the terminal. The rest of the problem set here asks us to perform some operations. So addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. And they want us to make sure that we can handle floating point division in here. So in your readings on Cisco Net Academy, they go over all of these different operators, mathematical operators, and teach you essentially how to run them in code. And so we're just going to be taking those examples and implementing them here. So I'm going to show you, I'll show you addition, and then I'll show you division, and maybe an error, or not an error, but an issue you might run into with division. And then I'll leave the challenge up to you to solve it. Your textbook definitely has the answer for it, the Cisco Net Academy. So we'll do addition first. So we can go down to a new line right here, and to do addition, we'll just print the results of this kind of directly. So I'm going to do another print statement, and then I can describe what I'm going to print here. So instead of starting with a string text right here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to print the addition of my int to my float. Now, one way I could do that is by typing in 42 plus 1337, and then I can run that, and you'll see that if we run it here, we just get the result 55.37. So I could also make this a little bit easier for the user to understand what's going on, because again, if a user runs this program, they are just going to see 55.37 printed to the screen, but they won't necessarily know that this is a result of addition. So we can add some more text to make this a little bit easier for our user to understand here. So I can instead put these in quotes. So I could do 42 plus 33.7 equals, and then I can do a comma, and then I can run that same operation again outside of the quotation marks. So I'm going to do my int plus my float, and then run that there. Okay, and so now we get 42 plus 1337 equals the same result that we had before. And one thing I want you to take note of here is that what I didn't do was type in 42 plus 13.37 outside of this. This would work too. If I run this, here are the results we have originally. If I run it again, it's going to be the same exact results. So it looks identical, no difference to the user, but there is a difference in the code here. And so one of the reasons we create variables and assign values to them is because the variable names are easier for us to keep track of and kind of understand what they're meant to be versus what are called sometimes magic numbers like these in the program. You might know what these are because you wrote this program, but maybe if you come back to this program a few weeks from now, or if you're working with other developers or other programmers on a larger project, and they are working in the same code base, the same code that you're working on, it might be really difficult to understand, for them to understand what these numbers mean or why they're in here. So in general, if we assign a value to a variable, we should, whenever possible, use the variable name instead of the raw value that we passed into the variable in the rest of our code. And so that's why the proper way to do this is do my int plus my float. Okay? This also prevents typos or mistakes. I only have to assign values to my int and my float once up here, and then I kind of never change them. And every time I refer to my int and my float, I know I'm going to get those same values. If I am just passing in numbers all the time, I might make a mistake like this, where I do 133.7, I put the decimal in the wrong place, just a typo. And so using variable names helps us avoid those types of mistakes too. All right, so I'll put this back to the way I recommend you do it. All right, and so that's our addition operation there. The next one I want to show you is division. I'm sure you can figure out subtraction just doing it the same way. You'll just have to change kind of the operators that are printed out here, and then subtraction will work. And then I'm going to skip over multiplication because division, there's two different types of division in Python. Again, this is discussed in Net Academy. So let's start off here. I'm going to do the same format. So I'm going to print, and I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to do a couple of them just to show you. You only have to do one example, and you could choose kind of any one that you want. The first one I'm going to do is 42 divided by 13.37, using, again, this / operator to indicate division. And then I'll do equals, same thing, comma, and then I'm going to do my int divided by my float here. Okay, so I don't know the results of this off the top of my head, but you can take out a calculator, and if you divide 42 by 13.37, we're expecting to get a decimal value coming out of that, right? And so if we run this code as is, we are going to see that we get a decimal value. It's actually close to pi. That's interesting. And so we get a decimal value, kind of a really long one with a bunch of numbers trailing after it here, but that looks like the correct format there. Your textbook talks about another type of division called floor division or integer division, and that is when you use 2 of these / instead of 1. So if I run this same program again with 2 of these slashes here for division, you're going to see that my results get rounded down, or floored, get rounded down to the nearest whole number or the nearest integer, which is 3. However, since one of my operands here is a float, the results are still going to be displayed as a float with a 0.0 after it. To show you another example, if we just do our division with integers, it'll look a little bit different. So if I do 42 divided by 42, right? Let's just say both of our integer values. And I'll do a comma, and this time I'll do my int divided by my int with the single slash right here. Okay, and we run that. We're going to see that, we're going to see that the result gets kind of converted to a float right here when we're using the single or the regular division in Python. And so that's an important thing to keep in mind. There might be some programming applications where it's important that you keep your type an integer and you don't have it converted to a float, or maybe you don't want the decimal printed. So again, even though we're only working with integers in this whole line right here, it gets converted implicitly to a float when we're doing regular division. If I change this to do that floor division again, it will round, it won't need to round anything because the result is 1 already. But when we're only working with integers, if I run this one more time, you'll see that that floor division takes away the floating point conversion. Okay, so this might be useful to you if you're doing division with integers and you don't want a decimal to be displayed, even if it's not rounding anything. If you just want an integer to be printed, not a float, you can use these 2 / or this floor division when dealing with only integers. All right, and so again, you don't need to show both of those. You can just do one example of division for your assignment, pick any one that you want, and then you'll just have to add in the multiplication and the subtraction as well. All right, so that kind of completes that first assignment. And just a reminder for everyone here too, this is kind of how I want you to submit your work here. So I want you to take all of this raw code that you wrote, maybe not the comments at the top, but just take the main body of your code. I want you to copy it, go down to copy, and then paste this into like a Word document. You could paste this into a Google Docs, anything like that. Just the raw text, just as it is right here. And then that's what you're going to submit for your assignment. I got one question from a student already who was asking, hey, since we're writing kind of 3 different programs right here, do I have to submit 3 different documents? No, you don't have to. If you want to, you can take all of your code and paste it all into the same Word document. Maybe just separate it kind of by problem number or some indication of where one program ends and the other one starts, so it's easier for me to read. But you can just submit one document to make it easier for you. The other thing that you need to submit in addition to the copy pasted text of your actual code is just a screenshot of your output. So I'm going to zoom out a little bit so it's easier to see the terminal. I was zoomed in, so hopefully you all can make sense of this. But in addition to that code that you copy, we'll run this whole thing, and then you can just take, you don't have to copy the raw text, you can just take a screenshot using something like a snipping tool to take a screenshot of this, and then just submit that screenshot, paste it into your document. Okay, and that's the easiest way to submit your assignments. That goes for all assignments in this course, all programming assignments. So the next problem set is having us get input from a user. Your text goes over that as well, and the first one is pretty straightforward. I'm going to actually skip over that one and go to the basic calculator using input problem to walk you through the beginnings of that problem and make a suggestion on how I might approach solving that. So instead of deleting this file here, I'm going to create another file for the calculator app so I can have kind of all my code in separate files. And I'll call this one calculator.py. Let me zoom back in a little bit for you all. We'll get rid of this side menu. Okay, same thing as before. You don't have to do this part, but just so we can follow along, I am going to paste in here. Whoops. Let me copy the right thing. And then I'm going to paste in here just the problem statement so that it's easier for me to work in one place and for us to follow along. So they want us to create a calculator app that does a couple of things, and they give us the steps. The first one is to ask the user to input two numbers. So we want to get user input for two different numbers. And then we want to get a third piece of user input prompting them to select an operation. So addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. The same things you will have implemented in the first problem set. And then they just want us to perform the operation based on what the user chooses and then kind of print the results to the screen. Okay, so this takes exactly what we just went over. We have to create a few variables for user input. We have to make sure that we are converting the user input to the correct data types, and then we have to perform some type of operation on that. I'm going to close my terminal just so I have some more screen space here. So in Net Academy, they'll go over the input function, which is a function that receives user input from the terminal, and you can assign whatever the user types in to a variable. And so for this one, since we're asking for two numbers, I'll just keep my variable names short. I'll do num1 equals, I'll leave this blank for now, and then num2 equals. Okay, so two numbers. Now, what do these equal? Well, they equal the result of the input function. So if I type in input and open up parentheses here, and your text goes into a little bit more detail about how to use input, but you can also read the built-in documentation. It essentially says that this is going to open up a prompt when the user runs this program, prompting them to enter something into their console or terminal that comes back. And if you want to give instructions to a user, you can put those instructions in quotation marks in the input function. So my instructions for the user will be enter a number, colon, and then I'll do a space just so it looks better. In fact, for the second one, enter another number, I won't put the space after the colon just so you can see visually how it looks different, even though both of these will work. It's just about user experience at that point. So let me run what this looks like right now. And so you'll see the program runs and it's kind of paused at this first input statement. Scroll down here, enter a number, and you can see there's a nice space after the colon where the cursor is flashing for the user to input a number. So I'll do 4, and then if I hit enter, it's going to move to the next line of code, and it says enter another number, and then you'll see right here, the number is kind of right after the colon. It's just a matter of preference or opinion. I don't think this looks as clean, which is why I like to put a space after my user prompts when I'm using input. But again, both of these technically will work. And I'll hit enter there. Okay, and so we didn't print anything or we didn't do anything with these variables yet, but just to demonstrate, if I print num1 and then print num2, and I run this program again, move it up a little, so I'll do 3 and 22, and then the print statements come. So you'll see that the values that were passed in are saved, and then we can do stuff with them afterwards. We can print them, we can perform operations on them, etc. All right? So we got those two numbers. Now, an important thing here is that if I try to do addition, let's say, I'm not even going to ask the user yet. I'm just going to print num1 plus num2. Okay, right? We're taking our first number, our second number, and then we're just printing the results to the screen. So I'm going to do for my first number 10 and my second number 10. And so the results of 10 plus 10 should be 20, right? That's what we're hoping to get back. And so if we hit enter, I get 10, 10, which is definitely not what 10 plus 10 equals if we're adding those two integers together. And this brings up a really important point or a side effect of the input function. Input, no matter what the user passes in, whether it's a string, letters, numbers, special characters, it converts all of them to the string data type. And in Python, the plus operator can work on strings as well, but it does what we call concatenating strings, or it just puts two strings together. To demonstrate an example of this, I am going to run the program again, but instead of following the directions and passing in a number, I'm going to pass in two strings. So you can see kind of what that looks like. So enter a number. I'm going to enter hello, comma, space, and then I'm going to enter world. And if I do that, you'll see that it prints out hello world. Because all that addition is doing is it's taking hello and it's just appending world to the end of it. Okay, so we don't want this to happen when we're working with integers. And so what we need to do, since we know that input takes a string, is we need to manually convert what we're getting back from this function to an integer. Now we can do that in a couple of ways. Since we already have our variables here, we could do something like when we're working with them. So if I want to do additions, I could print int and then pass in num1 plus int and then pass in num2. And just putting int and then a value inside of it converts it to an integer data type. So if I run that and I do 10 and 10 again, you'll see I get 20, the correct answer there. But this is kind of clunky because anytime we want to use num1 and 2, let's say we want to print a bunch of different things, we're always going to have to write int in front of it. Again, we could forget to write it, and it's also just more typing. So what I like to do is take care of it up here when we're actually assigning a value to a variable. So again, int, it says convertible to int. Basically, whatever we pass inside of these parentheses will be converted to an integer. We don't have to pass in a raw string. We could actually pass in the entire result of this function. So what I mean by that is, in front of input, if I type in int and then open the parentheses, and I got to put another one at the end, I'll space this out so hopefully it looks a little clearer. What we're saying is, run input first and get the result, and then whatever that result is, apply this int function to that result, and then return that final value and store that in num1. Okay, so it's just a shorthand to do this all on one line. So again, I'm just going to wrap the whole input function in int, just like this. And I'll demonstrate one more time. If I do 10 and 10 now, oops, I got to still print num1 plus num2. So I'll do 10 plus 10, and we get the correct 20. Okay, and now I can do whatever I want. I can do division on those. So 10 divided by 10 should give me 1. Yep. And I don't have to keep putting int in front of it because I took care of that at the time that I was declaring and assigning values to the variable. All right, but they want a third piece of input from the user. We want to prompt the user to pick what type of operation we're running. We don't want to just assume that the user wants us to add or subtract, right? We want to ask them. So our third choice, our operator choice, and we can name this whatever we want. I'll just name it operator equals, and the same thing, we want to get input from the user, and then we want a helpful prompt. So you could do this a bunch of different ways. But I'll just say, please choose an operator, and then maybe I'll give them some options. So I'll do what, plus, minus, multiply, whoops, or divide. And then we'll do quote like that. So just to show you what this looks like, we'll run through it again. So we'll do 10, 10. It says, please choose an operator, plus, minus, multiply, or division. And then the user could put something like plus in here, right? So we'll get their value back, and then we need to essentially figure out what to do with that value, or how to apply different operations to it. Now, your textbook does not go into specific branching statements in Python yet. We haven't gone over if statements yet, and so you might need to do a little bit of outside research to solve this problem, because essentially what we need to do is, depending on which operation the user chooses, we need to perform a different mathematical operation. And in Python and many programming languages, there is what's called branching logic, where if the user does something, we can do something in response to that. And so the way that we can handle that is by using an if statement here. So we can say if the operator equals, and not equals like assigning a value to a variable. If we do two equals in Python, that it means it's checking the value of a specific variable. And if the results match, it's going to return true. If they don't match, it'll return false. So if our operator equals, let's say plus, we'll put a colon, and then on a new line, we can perform the addition operation. So I will print num1 plus num2. And that is how you do a branching statement. And we have to essentially do one of those for each of the operators. This is just one way to solve this problem. So if our operator equals minus, right, then we're going to print num1 minus num2. And then you would do the same thing. So if operator double equals division, right, print the division. And then same thing for multiply. So that's one way to solve this problem. There's a couple other ways to solve this problem. And so what I would recommend, since again the textbook hasn't talked about these if statements yet, and I'm just showing you the syntax here, is to try to Google around and even utilize AI at this point to figure out specifically how you would solve this step of the problem. What I don't recommend you do, and this is really just for the benefit of your own learning, I don't recommend that you copy the whole problem statement into ChatGPT or Gemini or whatever AI you use and ask it to help you solve it, because AI will tend to just write the whole code for you. And then once you've seen it, it's really hard to kind of unsee it, and that takes away a lot of the learning. So what I would do is kind of what I demonstrated right here. I would start writing the program with things that you already know how to do. Things like getting user input in the form of two numbers, and then getting the operator, having the user choose something. And then when you get kind of maybe stuck, if you're not watching this video or you don't know about if statements and you're wondering, how do I perform an operation based on what the user selected as their operator, right? Like this is your comment, this is the question that you're thinking about right here. I would take a very small piece of code like this one, and I would just copy this directly into AI and ask it, hey, I want to do a mathematical operation based on what a user is giving me as a result for this line of code. How do you suggest I do that? Or can you show me some ways to do that? And then it'll spit out a lot of code and you can kind of read through it. But the benefit is it's not going to solve the whole problem for you, but it is going to show you a solution or a way to approach the code that works. But like the variable names will be different. They might use more than two numbers, right? They might not even use numbers. And so what you can do then is kind of take what you learned from the AI, come back to your code, and then manually implement it yourself. I'd say even if whatever tool you uses outputs like exactly what you need to solve the problem, rather than just copy pasting it in, even if you're just reading it and retyping it, I recommend that you do that because a lot of early programming is building that kind of muscle memory or that repetition of typing out code so that you remember simple things like how to assign values to a variable, how to get input from a user. And based on my experience, every time you're copying and pasting in the beginning and not writing that out yourself, it's just going to make it much more difficult for you to retain this information. All right. So I'm on about 30 minutes right now. If you've stuck around till the end, I appreciate it. Hopefully, some of this was enlightening for you and helped you out. Remember, you can use the discussion post too. Even though the discussion posts might not be specifically about this assignment, you can use those discussion boards to just ask questions to your fellow classmates. I am also available via Canvas inbox or email to answer any questions. So we can do it over email, or I'm happy to set up a time on Zoom to meet with you and we can walk through and troubleshoot some of your code. All right. Thank you, everyone.